Hello, my name is Summer Gibson, and I'm going to be reviewing the 2004 book Technology and Social Inclusion, written by Mark Warcher. Mark is an assistant professor of education, and he works in Irvine, California, so he's pretty local. He's the founding editor of the journal Language Learning and Technology. And in his book that we're going to be reviewing today, he covers the digital divide, explaining that it's more complex than we originally thought. It is not about people that do and do not have technology, but he explains that it's more about intertwining technology with issues of economics, politics, communication, language, education, to make it all more affordable and accessible, and understanding how we can sustain that in multiple countries. So, an introduction, again, Warshire explains that the digital divide is more complex than simply having or having no technology. He uses the resource tool of the hole in the wall story, which I had heard before in a TED Talk in a previous class, where they highlighted this experience in a positive way. In the book that I read, this is highlighted in a slightly different way. While the computer tool was very nice for the students to have, it was a 24 access tool that all the students could use. It wasn't sustainable, and as they kept using it, they found that the students were just using Paint and word processor, and they were starting to use them more as games. They also did not have their native language in this program, so when they went to use them, they were all in English and they did not understand what they were reading or going through, which is slightly handicapping the students. They also didn't have any special education programs set up with this, so there's no speech to text or any aid that would have helped them in understanding or using this computer if they needed special needs. Inside the book, there are 7 chapters. These include the chapters and then the acknowledgement section, notes, references, and index section. Chapter 1, the author provides a scope, and he's going to talk about the Dell computer, technologies in the past, how we moved from corresponding with letters to going through the radio, and now we learn online and we can use the web online. In Chapter 2, he explains the differences between devices, conduits, and literacy. So while someone might have a device, that doesn't mean they can sustain use on that device. That's where you need a conduit. And then they also talk about literacy. So if you don't know how to use the product, then you're probably not going to keep going through and using your device. You're probably just going to set it down and do it your traditional way. In Chapter 3, they talk about connectivity, where we know bandwidths are either really high, really low. So it's about getting that accessibility to connectivity sustained and available for multiple countries. In Chapter 4, they talk about digital resources, making them better for languages so that people that use their native language are more able to understand the material in their native language and not have to relearn it through another language. They also talk about special needs and making their materials adaptable to what the students actually need and how to better support those students. In Chapter 5, they discuss the just people in general and their education. This goes and it ties back into literacy, and it talks about how people use technology in education, and this goes along with schools and the school's ability for their finances and their resources that they get and that are provided by the district. In Chapter 6, they talk about communities and institutions. Again, this further goes along with education, what is available, what's not available, and understanding that it's not just getting the technology, it's more complex again. And so they're scaffolding the ideas and building on, while your school might have internet, maybe they don't supply the devices. Or if they do supply the internet, maybe it's really low bandwidth, but they also supply devices, so that might be slightly better, but it's still not yielding really good results, and that's what the author talks about. And then in Chapter 7, he closes off all of what he was saying, and this is actually where we get to see his voice the most. Throughout the book, he doesn't use his own voice in what he gives, and I will discuss that a little bit later in the next section. But here we do get to see his voice and see what he does agree or disagree with. And he also uses a note section which was very helpful because then you get to see why he is using the resources that he's using. And it's essentially a rationale of resources, which will be really good to review later when I do my own work and if I use his resources as a tool. So this book was very informative. It came with a lot of great resources. The author talks about what he found, he puts it in a great scope, he defines everything, and he gives a lot of great resources and tools throughout the entire book. The only thing I would say is because this was so resource heavy, you don't get a lot of his ideas until later on, close to the end of the book. And while everything that he provided was valid, that didn't necessarily make it easy to read through. In the conclusion and notes section, that's where we see the author's voice. He explains the information, he adds on any thoughts that he thought were more relevant and that needed ties. I do wish this was done more in the book. I feel like it was just a research paper that I kept reading and reading, and it had lots of citations that were very distracting. It had great information, but you can't sit there and read this as a easy read. It wasn't an easy read. It definitely had a lot of findings, a lot of cases, and a lot of citations. So if you're looking for good resources, I would say use this book to scan through it and see what you can find to use later, especially in the notes section, because this is where he talks about how he ties his resources to how he wants to use them. And he redefines them as well in that section. So it's kind of like annotations, and they're very helpful. Also, it should be noted that the book was made in 2004, which might be why there's not a whole lot of new and innovative ideas. It's all just expanding on previous ideas, and now that we've had a lot more research done, we're learning about more information that's definitely new and more productive and just better because it is more connected to our time right now. So in conclusion, this book was a little dry. It was a little hard to read continuously. The citations made it pretty hard because he's always introducing or talking about some sort of essay or thing that he found, and that was pretty hard to read through. The resources were great. I am not going to take away from his resources as many citations as there were. There were great resources. You could really use those in any other research or even in your own classroom to support what you're teaching. So I will definitely be referencing those myself. I do wish that his voice was heard more. While he did expand on things, he didn't offer new ideas in his own opinion. He just said that they were either more complex or he added a little bit more to it by connecting it to another story. So I do wish there was more of his voice, not just in chapter 7. But other than that, I really did appreciate the book. While I did not enjoy reading it as much, it had great resources. So if I was using it for a resource tool, I probably would have found it a lot more productive and easier to go through. But I had read it from beginning to end, and that was, again, very dry. So definitely a good resource tool, maybe not a good entertainment.